I can have you, can you see that picture on the screen in front of you? Actually, if you just look right in
Should
front
be
of
on
you.
this one right here, maybe?
Oh,
You see that picture?
yes.
Can you identify who's in that picture for us?
Yes, that's my son Joey with all the curly, beautiful hair. And Chubba was his nickname, was on his lap in summer. And then in the background is Gianni that looked just like Joey.
And you called him Chubba. What's his real name?
Joseph Jr., Joey Jr.
Do you know approximately when this picture was taken?
This was on Joey's birthday.
Do you remember what birthday?
No, ma'am, not the exact year.
What exhibit number is that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. That would be People's Exhibit 3 for identification.
Thank you.
Do you recall Summer renting a limo for his 40th birthday?
Yes.
And was this picture taken at that time, to your knowledge?
Yes.
So this would have been his 40th birthday.
Yes.
And that would have been 2009, is that correct?
Correct.
When was he born?
Joey was born November 20th, 1969.
Now, you mentioned that Joe had 2 boys that we see pictured here. Did he have another child from a previous marriage?
Yes.
And who is that?
Jonah McStay.
And who did Jonah live with?
His mother, Heather.
Where did they reside?
Laguna Beach.
Do you know approximately how long Joe and Summer had been together? In 2010?
Married or
Just together.
like 4 or 5 years.
Back in 2010, where did they live?
San Clemente.
Did they move to Fallbrook at some point?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was?
Purchased a house in November
Of what year?
of 2009.
Okay, so if you just told us that they lived in San Clemente in 2010, would you have been confused about what time frame we were talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So they purchased a house in Fallbrook in 2009, you said?
Yes.
And where did they move from?
San Clemente.
Did they move immediately into the Fallbrook house?
No.
Where did they live before they moved into the Fallbrook house?
In my home in Trilogy.
That was the one in Corona?
Yes.
And how long did they stay at your house in Trilogy before moving to the house in Fallbrook?
A few months.
Did you ever see the house in Fallbrook?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 20 for identification purposes. Should come up on the screen in front of you. Maybe. Do you recognize? Oops. 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 That's not right.
Yes.
You see that picture? And what is that a picture of?
Of the home he purchased.
What type of work did Joe do for a living?
He made custom fountains.
Do you know how long he had been doing that?
Not exactly.
What was the name of his company?
We called it Epic, Earth-Inspired Products.
And you said that they made, I'm sorry, what did you say they made again?
Fountains.
And can you describe what type of fountains they would make? Were they large or small or?
All different sizes, some for corporations and then some for homes.
Did he, like, some of them were larger, is that right?
Correct.
Did he have a warehouse that he worked out of?
Yes.
Where was that?
Azusa.
Now, if he wasn't working out of the warehouse, do you know where he would work from?
Home.
And at the time in February of 2010, did you have a cell phone?
Yes.
Did you have a couple of cell phones?
Yes.
Was one of them for work?
Yes.
Do you recall what the cell phone numbers were that you had?
No.
Okay. Does the phone number 909-277-0127 sound familiar?
Yes.
And how about 951-603-3432?
No.
No? Okay. Would you have provided your cell phone numbers to a detective at the time that the case was going on? Do you remember doing that?
Yes.
And did you also have an 805 number that you would use?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you worked up in Ventura and the family had lived in San Clemente and then they moved into the house in Fallbrook. Would you see the family, and by family I mean would you see Joey and Summer and the children during that time period?
Yes.
How often would you see them, do you think?
Once every other week or at least once a month.
And when you would see them, where would you see them?
I saw them at my home in Glen Ivy, South Corona.
And did you have an opportunity to interact with the family and the children?
Yes.
Do you recall either of the children ever wearing a backpack?
Yes.
And what can you tell us about that?
They had a few backpacks, different styles.
Did the children seem to like wearing backpacks?
Yes.
And do you recall either Summer or Joseph ever using some sort of a towel to dry the children off after a bath?
Yes.
Do you remember seeing any towels that had like a little animal face on it?
Some type of hoodie to the robe.
I'm going to show you a picture and see if you actually recognize this. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Sure.
Okay. I'm approaching you with People's Exhibit 4 for identification purposes. Can you tell me if you recognize that robe?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Okay. Did you recognize who that was inside of the robe?
Chubba.
And that's Joe for the record? Okay.
Joey Jr.
Now, you indicated that the family moved in with you, or moved into your house for a period of time. Were you in Ventura at that time?
Yes.
And what did the family do, if you know, with all of their items from their home in San Clemente before their Fallbrook house was ready?
They went into pods.
What are pods?
Big storage containers.
And do you know where the storage containers were kept?
No.
Were they parked at your house?
Oh, no.
Okay. Now, when they moved into the Fallbrook home, did you have any knowledge of them doing remodeling to the home?
Yes.
What kind of remodeling were they doing?
The floors, painting, the granite, extreme remodeling.
Did you and Summer have contact regarding the remodeling that you were
Yes.
doing at the house?
Yes.
And why was that?
I'm in that business, so she wanted opinions.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you had gone to the Fallbrook home, is that right?
Yes.
When was the first time that you were ever at the Fallbrook home?
When the detectives called us.
Had you been to the Fallbrook home to visit Joseph and Summer and the kids before that time period happened?
No.
You never went there for Thanksgiving?
Yes, Thanksgiving.
Okay. So you recall being in the house before meeting the detectives there in February of 2010?
Yes.
Maybe my question wasn't clear, so if it's not clear, please let me know.
Okay.
Sometimes I ask a question and it comes out totally different than I think it sounds. Okay, so you were there around Thanksgiving
Yes.
of 2009,
Yes.
and did you see some of the remodeling that they were doing?
They were just moving some things in.
Okay. Did you go there at any other time before you met the detectives there?
Yes, Christmas. before Christmas.
And while you were there at Christmas time, do you recall seeing a futon? Where was the futon in the house?
In the family room.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 5. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Sure. Counsel need not request permission to approach to show exhibits.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. And Susan, do you recognize this picture?
Yes.
And can you tell us what's actually depicted in that photo?
They're eating popcorn.
Okay. I'm going to put it actually up on the overhead here so you can see it. When you say they're eating popcorn, who are you talking about?
My two grandsons, Gianni and Joey Jr.
Okay, and is that the futon that was at the house?
Yes.
And when you see the futon here, does it appear to have a cover on it?
Yes.
Now, when you were working up in Ventura during this time period, would you still have contact with your son, Joe?
Yes.
How often would you speak to each other?
Every other week.
So would it be unusual for you to go a week without speaking to each other?
That's not unusual.
Prior to February 4th of 2010, do you remember the last time that you spoke with either Joe or Summer?
Yes, I spoke with Joey and saw Joey for Christmas.
Did you speak with him on the telephone after that?
Yes.
Do you remember when the last time you spoke with him on the phone was?
The beginning of January.
Do you remember talking to Detective Dugal in this case from the San Diego Police Department?
Yes.
And at the time that you talked to Detective Dugal, that would have been back in February of 2010, is that correct?
Correct.
And were the events of what happened around that time fresher in your mind then than they are now?
Of course, yes.
And do you recall telling Detective Dugal that you talked to Joey the first week of February sometime?
Yes.
So did you, as you sit here now, because you indicated that you thought you talked to him the first week in January, do you remember talking to him the first week in February?
It was either the end of January or beginning of February.
Okay. After February 4th, when was the next time that you spoke with either Joe or Summer?
I didn't.
Do you know Charles Merritt?
Yes.
And do you see him here in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Could you please point him out and describe an article of clothing he's wearing, where he's seated?
He's wearing a blue shirt with glasses and a red colored tie.
May the record reflect that the witnesses identified the defendant?
Record still reflect.
Were you contacted by him in February of 2010?
Yes.
Do you recall when you were contacted by him?
Exact date?
Yes.
The 9th.
Okay. Okay, I have a calendar up here that I'm going to mark. You believe that he came to your house on February 9th?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and mark this for you, just because you don't need to move out from there. So, let me just show this to you really quick.
What exhibit number?
This is exhibit number 568, Your Honor, and February 9th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the reason that the defendant came to your house?
He knocked on my door
How many times had you met him prior to that?
once, briefly.
When was that you had actually met him one time before briefly?
During Christmas, he came to my house because Joey was at my house at the holidays and was giving him something, I don't know, it was computer or work related, but he came there and got it and left.
And which house was that he came to?
Glen Ivy.
So you've met this man one time before when he came to your house, and he showed up at your house on February 9th. Why did he tell you he was there?
Couldn't get a hold of Joey.
Do you remember approximately what time of day that was?
No.
And how long do you think that he was at your house on the night?
Not sure how long. Don't remember.
Do you remember talking to Detective Steers and telling him that it was approximately 30 minutes?
Approximately.
So it wasn't
Not long.
Not long? Okay. And do you remember what type of vehicle the defendant was driving at that time?
No.
Do you remember telling Detective Steers that it was like a white utility truck?
He had a white utility truck, I know.
Okay. And how do you know that?
I saw it another time.
Was that the time when he came over at Christmas time?
No.
It was another time?
Yes,
Was that after the night?
correct.
But on the night, you don't recall which vehicle he was driving?
Correct.
Now, during that visit, he indicated to you that he couldn't get a hold of Joey. Can you tell us a little bit about what the conversation was?
He asked if I had heard from him, and because he hasn't had no contact with him.
And how did you respond?
Sometimes Joey would take little weekend trips or whatever with his family, so he could have just been out of town for something like that, which he does.
Okay. Was there a suggestion that you should call law enforcement?
Not then, no.
Did you think that you should call law enforcement at that time?
No.
And it was kind of suggested yesterday, Ms. Blake, that this wasn't a big deal or there wasn't really any concern on the part of Joe's family at the time that the defendant came and wanted to talk to the family about him being missing. Were you concerned at this point on February 9th?
Yes, I had asked him to move the dog bowls outside and the water bowl to see if they had gone out of town, and we could tell if someone was feeding the dogs outside.
Well, at that visit on February 9th that occurred, you had indicated prior to that you had a Monday-Tuesday schedule where you were off on those days. Is that right?
That's correct.
So you were on your 2 days off from work when he came to see you?
Correct.
Did you return to work the following day?
Yes, I drove back Tuesday.
Okay, so the same day on the 9th you drove back?
Correct.
Okay. And as part of your conversation with the defendant that day, did he indicate to you that he was going to do anything in terms of checking on Joe?
I'm not sure.
Do you remember talking to one of the detectives and telling them that the defendant told you he was going to go to the house?
Oh, yes, he did go to the house.
Well, that's what he told you he was going to do, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Did he tell you if he had been to the house yet or if he was going to go to the house, if you recall?
Go to the house.
When did he tell you he was going to go to the house?
On that day, the 9th.
Do you remember him saying he was going to go there straight from your residence?
Correct.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Correct.
Okay. Did the defendant tell you at that time if he had spoken to anybody else about not being able to reach your son?
I don't remember.
Do you remember telling one of the detectives that he had also told you that Dan Kavanaugh hadn't been able to reach your son?
I just don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember giving the defendant at that time your telephone number?
My cell number?
Okay. After that visit with the defendant, did you try and get a hold of your son?
Yes, I've called.
You called? Okay. Did you try and get a hold of Summer?
No, just Joey.
Were you able to get a hold of Joe?
No.
Could you leave a message at that time?
Yes, I left a message.
And do you remember, sometimes when you call a cell phone, it will ring and then go to voicemail, and sometimes you'll call and it directly goes to voicemail. Did either of those things happen when you called?
Yes.
What happened?
But it would go to voicemail.
Just directly?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 401 for identification purposes. We were talking earlier about the defendant's truck. And do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what does that look like to you?
It's a white truck with work boxes like on the side.
Okay. And was that the type of
Utility.
truck that the defendant drove at the time?
Yes.
And that's up on the screen in front of you. And do you recall when he came to your house if that was the truck that he was driving?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you recall seeing him in any other type of a vehicle?
I don't remember.
Okay. Now, after you got that visit from the defendant, did you call anybody else about your son? Joey?
Yes, Mikey.
And Mikey is your other son, is that right?
Yes.
And did Mikey tell you if he had been contacted by anybody regarding Joey being gone?
I don't remember.
Do you recall him telling you that he had been contacted by Dan Kavanaugh?
I just don't remember.
Okay. I can have just a moment, Your Honor. Did you know Dan Kavanaugh?
Yes.
How did you know him?
From many years ago.
When you say that you knew him from many years ago, how was it that you knew him?
He was a lot younger and helped Joey with the internet.
Can you describe for us, when you say he helped him with the internet, what do you mean by that?
Well, this was much earlier. He was a younger kid, like 17, 18, when I very first met him.
Okay. Where was it that you met him?
San Clemente.
Who was he friends with in your family?
Joey.
Did him and Joey ever live together?
No.
And when you say that he helped him with the internet, what is it that you mean by that?
Joey had started his fountain business with his store in Dana Point, so they were working with that.
Okay, and you indicated before that you didn't recall if when you spoke to Mike if Mike told you that Kavanaugh had tried to call him. You talked to the detectives in this case. Do you recall that? Talking to detectives in this case?
Yes.
And would it refresh your memory if you reviewed that section of your report?
Yes.
Okay. It's page 1, December 5th. Oh, you need your glasses?
Yeah. So,
That's okay. And if you could read Kristen's second paragraph.
Between it,
Yeah, not out loud, just to yourself.
okay.
Would that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me take that. And so do you remember telling the detectives that when you spoke to Mike, he indicated to you that Dan Kavanaugh had gotten in touch with him?
Yes.
So you indicated then that, or you testified that on the 9th, the defendant came to your house, you gave him your cell phone number, and he told you he was going to go check on them in Fallbrook.
Yes.
When did you next hear from him?
Don't know exact dates,
Okay.
but I want to say Saturday, Mikey went down there.
Okay, prior to Mike going down there on Saturday, did the defendant call you at all about what he had discovered at the house?
Yes.
And to the best of your recollection, when do you think that was?
It was that same day.
Were you in Ventura yet?
No.
Okay.
Driving.
Okay. And what can you tell us about what was said during that conversation?
This is when we talked about moving the dog bowls, the food and the water, to see if someone was possibly taking care of the dogs and they were out of town.
And what did he tell you about that?
That he would do it, when he went down there with the food and the water, and then would check it later.
Did you hear from him later in reference to that?
Yes.
And I know this is probably a tough question, but do you remember when that was?
No.
And what was said during that conversation?
That the dog bowls were moved.
And how did you feel after you heard that?
I thought they had a friend, taking care of the animals, and they were out of town.
And those conversations that you had with the defendant, do you remember how many times you talked to him?
No, I can't count.
Did it all occur within relatively a few days?
I don't remember.
Okay. Was there a conversation that you had with the defendant where he indicated to you that he was actually driving to the residence?
Repeat that?
Sure. In those few days that followed after the 9th, was there a conversation that you had with the defendant where he told you that he was actually driving to the residence?
Yes.
And you don't recall when that was?
No.
Now, during that week you indicated you went back up to Oxnard on the 9th,
Yes.
that night, and were you in Oxnard on the 10th?
Yes.
Did you hear from anybody about the family? Besides potentially those conversations you had with the defendant?
I don't recall. a long time ago.
Do you remember if you had been in contact with your son, Mike?
Yes.
Did the two of you have any discussion about him going to the house on February 13th?
Yes, he was going down there.
Did you talk to him when he was at the house at all?
No.
Do you remember him calling you from outside of the house?
No.
Did you speak to him after he had been in the house?
Yes.
And did the two of you talk about what he saw in the house?
Yes.
And what were you thinking at that time?
Well, I didn't think anything was missing by what he was saying. You know, it didn't look like just a lot of mess in the house.
So you had indicated, just going back a little bit in time, that the majority of the furniture that the family had when they moved into the house had been put in pods.
Yes.
Is that right? To your knowledge, did they ever unpack all of those pods and fully move into the house?
No.
So on Valentine's Day, which would be February 14th, were you still in Oxnard, or I'm sorry, in Ventura?
Yeah.
And at this point, did you ever check hospitals or anything like that to see if anybody had somebody that matched your son's description there?
I did not.
Why not?
Because it was Valentine's Day, and between the Super Bowl and Valentine's Day, I thought they were on a vacation.
Okay. On February 15th, were you contacted by anybody?
What is that date on?
February 15th would be, that would be the day, that Monday, where they were reported missing. Do you remember that day?
I received a call from my son.
Okay. And that would be Michael?
Yes.
And what was the context of that conversation?
To drive down to their house in Fallbrook.
And why were you supposed to do that?
He really was very brief. He just wanted me to drive down there.
Did he indicate to you that the family was being reported missing?
Yes.
So what did you do at that time?
Left
Left where?
Ventura and drove down. It was raining.
I'm sorry?
Left Ventura and drove down.
You drove down to where?
Fallbrook.
Do you remember about what time of day you arrived at the Fallbrook house?
It's in the evening.
Was anybody there when you arrived?
Yes.
Who was there?
My son was there. Mr. DeGaulle and a lot of his work. The Sheriff's Department of San Diego. Mr. Hill.
Did you go inside the house on that day?
No.
And did you talk to anybody on that date?
Yes.
Who did you speak to?
They put me in their car and didn't talk in their car. It was raining.
Would that be Detective Dugall that you spoke to?
There were a couple of detectives in there.
On February 15th, did you ever go inside of the house?
No.
During that interview that you had with Detective Dugall, was there anything conveyed to you about what potentially had happened with the family?
No. Just they're missing.
Did anybody talk to you about their vehicle? Where a vehicle was located?
Yes.
And what were you told about that?
That it was at the border. They had found it.
Which border are you referring to?
To Mexico.
Was that surprising to you?
Very.
Why?
Because my son wouldn't go to Mexico or take his children over the border.
And do you know about how long you were at the house on February 15th?
No, hours.
Where did you go after, show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 143 for identification? Do you recognize this?
Yes,
And what is that a picture of?
that's their car, Joey's car.
Okay, what kind of a car is that?
It's a SUV.
Okay, and that was the car that they had in 2010?
Yes,
When you arrived on February 15th, were there any cars that were at the house?
Joey's green truck. Can I stand?
That would help you.
Straighten.
Sure. If you need a break, let me know, and we can take a break.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Did you return to the house? Well, I'm assuming after you spoke to the police that night, you indicated you didn't go into the house. Where did you go when you left the Fallbrook house?
To Mikey's house.
At some point, did you return to the family house in Fallbrook?
Yes, later we did.
Do you recall when that was?
No, not exact date.
Do you recall it being February 16th of 2010?
I don't recall the date.
I'm going to show you a portion of your report if that would refresh your recollection. Yes?
Okay.
Okay.
The dates.
18. You can stay standing if that you want to.
Just stretch it a little bit. Holy moly. So right from here. Oh. All the way down.
So for reading that portion of the report, does that refresh your recollection of when you went back to the house?
Yes.
Was that on February 16th?
Yes.
And why was it that you went back to the house?
To look for something.
What were you looking for?
Looking for any clues as to why they're missing.
Did you have contact information at that time for Summers' family?
No.
And at some point when you went into that house, were you also looking for information on how to contact Summers' family?
Definitely.
When you went back to the house, did anybody go to the house with you?
When we went to the house, we had to call De Gaulle to have permission to go in.
Okay.
And I was worried about her, Summer's mother, finding information out, so I was trying to find some information on her.
Well, let me ask you, before you went to the house, you indicated that you were worried about Summer's mother finding out some information. Before you went back to the house, have you been contacted by anybody in terms of press?
Yes.
And what was the context of the contacts that you had?
Oh, we tell them no comment.
Okay, but were people were calling you, or press reporters and things like that, were they calling you for information? Or asking you questions?
Correct.
Okay. And to your knowledge, at this point, had Summers' family been notified?
I don't think so.
So my question... Oh,
Everyone needs to make sure your cell phones are either turned off or on silent.
so my question before this to you was, did you go to the house with anybody?
The first, I think MacGyver met me there.
And who is MacGyver?
As a friend of Joey's.
Somebody that you were familiar with?
Yes.
How did he end up meeting you at the house or going to the house with you?
We met at the house.
Did you contact him?
I can't remember if I contacted him or if he had called me, but we both met together.
Okay. How did you get into the house?
I didn't have a key, a locksmith.
Do you recall when you actually had the locksmith come out?
No.
I'm approaching with People's Exhibit 564. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is that?
That's the locksmith I paid to reduce and keep it.
Okay. And I'm going to put this up on, we'll put this up on the overhead. You indicated that you had gone back to the house on February 16th. Do you see that in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, so the date on this check is March 1st of 2010.
Yes.
Okay. Is this the check that you wrote for the company to change the locks?
Yes.
Okay. So this says March 1st, and you were at the house on February 16th. So had you had the locks changed yet?
Obviously not.
Okay. So as you sit here today, do you remember how you got into the house?
I don't remember.
Okay. You didn't have a different key or anything like that for the residence?
No.
Okay. Now, when you went up to the front door of the residence, can you describe for us what you saw?
Some shoes by the door.
And then showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 22. Should come on in the screen in front of you. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is
Yes.
that a picture of?
It is the front door.
And you indicated that you saw some shoes by the front door.
Correct.
Can you describe the shoes that you saw?
Of children's shoes.
Is there another pair of shoes in the picture?
Of boots.
And then when you went inside the house, can you describe for us what you saw?
Yes, wood that they had bought for the flooring was all stacked up in the living room.
And I'm showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 26. It's a little bit dark. Is that wood that you're describing what's depicted in this picture?
Yes.
And is
Yes.
that how it looked when you went into the house?
Yes.
And then what else did you see inside the house?
Dining room table.
And was that a dining room table that you had given them?
Islands, yes.
And what else did you see?
A small circular table through the hallway where you can see a circular small table.
Can we show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 23? Now you indicated that there was a table at the far end. Is that the table you're referring to in this photograph?
Yes.
Okay, when you say the table at the far end, we can see a chair on the right-hand side of that photograph. Is that the table that you were referring to that you had given them?
No, it's the one I gave them was oval.
Okay, so there's another table straight ahead at the end of that hallway there.
Correct.
Do you recognize that table?
Yes.
Is that the table you gave them?
No, that was their table.
That was their table. Okay. And is this an accurate photograph as how it looked on when you went in on February 16th?
Yes.
Okay, and on the side there, we see next to the chair, we see what looks like some cabinet doors. Can you see that?
Yes.
Were those there on February 16th?
Yes, there were cabinet doors.
Do you remember seeing the futon that day
Yes.
and showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 36? And do you recognize that?
Yes.
And is that the futon that was in the house on February 16th?
Yes.
Now, you indicated in a previous exhibit that we had with the kids sitting on it, there was a futon cover on it. When you went in on February 16th, was there a futon cover on that?
No.
Is that no?
Correct. No.
Okay. Now, when you went inside the residence that day, I see you grimacing a little. Do you need to take a break?
No, I'm okay. I'm just moving it.
Okay. When you went into the house that day, did you smell anything?
Definitely.
What did you smell?
It was a rotten smell. Mildew, dirty diapers, maggots. It just smells.
As a result of that odor that you smelled, and let me back up for one quick second. Did you go into the kitchen at all?
Yes.
And when you went into the kitchen, can you describe what you saw?
There was food out and about, and the coffee pot had mildew in it, and the smell. It was, dishes not washed, messy.
I'm going to approach you with People's Exhibit 17, and I'm just going to bring it up so you can look at it a little closer, because sometimes it's hard to see the detail. And do you recognize what's depicted in that photo?
Yeah, I remember all of this.
Okay, so what's depicted in this particular photo?
There's still some cabinets on the floor because they were repainting.
And in the
This is a little chair that goes to a little table for the boys, small little one.
Can you see on the edge of that, there appears to be like a kitchen island, and there's a plate. Do you see that right there?
Yes, barely.
Yeah, just a little bit. So when you walked into the kitchen on the 16th, was that part of what you saw?
Yes,
You indicated that there were dirty dishes and things like that, correct?
correct.
What did you do as a result of walking into the house and smelling that odor and things like that, seeing dirty dishes? What did you do?
I asked Mr. DeGaulle if I could clean this up some because the smell was so bad.
Did you clean up some that day?
Yes, I did. I did clean up some.
What did you clean up?
The kitchen, the coffee pot, and emptied the trash cans for the diapers.
Did you dust the house?
No,
Did you sweep the floors?
no,
Did you go around and spray Windex or bleach cleaner or anything like that?
no.
At the time that you went into the residence, do you recall there being painting supplies around?
Yes,
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 48. Do you see that on the screen in front of you?
yes,
And you had testified about a previous photo. There had been a drawer that had been sitting out. Was this consistent with what you saw on February 16th?
yes.
And do you know what color that paint was that they were using?
A beige shade.
Do you remember seeing a white shade anywhere?
No,
Do you remember talking to one of the detectives and telling them that the white that was being used was like a Navajo white?
cabinets are Navajo white.
Okay, so the cabinets that were being painted, that was a white paint?
Correct.
When you went in and you saw the paint supplies and things like that, did you clean that up?
No,
Did you move any of those items?
I don't remember.
Do you recall seeing blue painter's tape at the house
Yes,
showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 32? For identification purposes. Do you recognize that?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
what's that a picture of?
That's the kitchen with the island.
And do you see painter's tape in that picture?
Yes,
Did you go anywhere else inside the house?
into the restroom.
Did you do any cleaning inside of the restroom?
Yes, the trash cans
And is that the restroom that was downstairs or upstairs?
downstairs.
Did you go upstairs at all?
Not there. No.
You didn't go upstairs into the house at all?
Oh, yes, I have.
On February 16th, did you go upstairs into the house?
Yes.
And can you describe what you saw when you went upstairs?
A lot of children's outdoor playhouses, but indoor. It was very messy. The closet their closet to the master bedroom had stuff all over the place. They were living out of suitcases until they were moved in.
How long do you think that you were at the house that day?
I don't know exactly.
Did you go into the office area?
Yes.
What were you looking for in the office area?
Phone numbers, anything I could find.
And can you describe the office area?
It was, well, the kids played in there a lot, so it was messy.
Did you find any information in the office area that you believed to be important?
Yes.
What did you find?
I found some phone numbers that Joey had listed there. I saw some bank account numbers, information like that.
When you went in and you looked for that information, was it in drawers and filed away, or was everything just sort of out there?
In the drawers, kind of out there.
So both?
Both.
Okay. Well, was there like a filing cabinet where everything was filed at all?
No.
And exhibit, showing you what's been marked as exhibit 41. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes, that's the kitchen.
Was this how it looked on February 16th?
Yes.
I'm going to actually approach you with this particular exhibit, 41. And we can see several different items on the counter there. And you had indicated, when you first went into the house, you indicated that the counter had food items and things like that on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is this the counter or the island that you were referring to?
Yes.
And you cleaned this, is that right?
Yes.
Do you recognize any of those items that are sitting there on the counter?
Yes.
What are they?
Some are eyeglass holders. You can see.
Did Summer wear glasses?
Yes.
Did she wear them consistently?
Yes.
Is there anything else in that photograph that you recognize?
It's hard to see this. I can't tell what the other item is.
Got a close-up of that, which would be number 47 for identification purposes. Do you recognize anything else depicted in that photo?
I'm not sure what this is. Flashlight?
The black thing?
Yeah.
Wait for it to come up so we can...
Can't see.
Okay, so there's what appears to be a toothbrush, right? You see that?
Yes.
And then the next closest object to that, you don't recognize that?
Looks like a razor.
But you don't know what it
I'm
is?
not sure. It could be spoons. Children's spoons.
Well, we see the spoons in the middle of the eyeglass case and the other item, right?
Yes.
So do you know as you sit here what that other item is?
No,
Okay.
I don't. I can't tell.
When you went to the residence on February 16th, did you do any laundry?
No.
Was there anything else that you did on that date, on February 16th, inside of the house?
No, that's about it.
And you indicated from your previous testimony that you had had the house rekeyed somewhere around March 1st of 2010 because that's what we saw on that check. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know approximately how many other times you went into the house between, say, February and June?
A couple times, yes.
Did you have permission to go into the house those other times?
Yes, we had to call Mr. DeGaulle and the Sheriff's Department.
And And who did you go to the residence with on those other occasions?
I did meet with Summer's family
Do you remember when that was?
and cousin. I think it was your cousin. I'm not sure what month.
Do you recall telling Detective Sears that it was May or June that you went to the house with Summer's mother?
That's more, yeah. Yes.
Okay. When you went to the house with Summer's family in May or June, did you meet them at the house?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, had Summer's family been in the house prior to that?
I can't remember if we had an interview at the house prior to that.
Okay. When you went to the house on that date, sometime in May or June, do you recall if Summer's mother, Blanche, was doing any laundry?
Yes, we were.
Do you know what laundry was being done?
Not, I mean, whatever was up there that was needed.
Did you ever see Blanche remove the futon cover and wash it?
No.
And to clarify, when you went into the house on February 16th, the futon cover was not on, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you indicated that you were doing some of the laundry and things like that that was there. Why were you doing the laundry?
We were cleaning the house because it was going to go in foreclosure.
Why was the house going into foreclosure?
Because no payments have been made.
You follow that up with why had no payments been made?
Because my son was missing. So no payments were made on the home.
To your knowledge, was anything done with his bank account at Union Bank?
I don't think his loan was through Union Bank.
Well, he had a bank account at Union Bank, is that right?
Correct.
And did something happen with that bank account when they were gone, when they went missing?
Yes.
What happened with that bank account?
That account was closed and the funds went to his son in a trust.
Did that happen immediately?
No.
When did that happen?
Oh, it took months.
So prior to that, could anybody access that account after they were reported missing?
No.
Do you recall talking to the detective and telling them that the account had been frozen?
Yes, I thought it was frozen.
You indicated that you went with Summer's family in May or June. Was there anything else that you were doing with respect to the house at that time?
Well, I believe prior to that we had an interview in the house with DeGaulle, Mr. DeGaulle.
Did you ever take Jonah to the house?
Yes.
And why did you take Jonah to the house?
Because I felt if there's something that Jonah wanted of his father's or of his brothers, that, you know, that he could take whatever he wanted as a memory.
How old was Jonah at that time?
12, going on 13.
Did you ever remove or take a bag of clothing or anything like that?
I did take some of Chubba's and Gianni's clothing in case we found them, we'd have some clothing.
And Chubba is Joe Jr., right?
I'm sorry, yeah, Jimmy.
okay.
Jimmy.
So, in between February and using June, was there a lot of stuff going on with your family?
Definitely.
Were you being contacted by various reporters and things like that?
Yes, and we're passing out flyers and going to different area, posting pictures and
Were you keeping in contact with Detective Duval at that time period as well?
Yes,
Was there a time when he asked you to come in and look at a video from the border?
yes,
Did you do that?
yes.
What can you tell us about that?
He showed us a video of a family of 4 going over the border, and I knew it wasn't them.
Let me back up for a second. Could you see their faces in that picture?
No.
What could you see in the video?
How they walked, what they were wearing.
Was the video a clear-cut video?
It was fuzzy, not real clear.
Did you ever see the family from the front?
No,
So just the back of them?
correct.
Was there any confirmation that that was them?
No confirmation.
Did you hope it was?
I would have taken anything then.
After the family went missing in February of 2010, you testified previously that Joe had a business. Was there some effort to try and keep the business afloat?
Yes.
Who was making the effort to keep the business afloat?
Let me interrupt you at this point before we get into this area. We'll go ahead and take our morning recess at this time, 15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, or allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. We'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, you can get up, do whatever.